Welcome to Gift of Light, a program designed to give you insights, hints, and clues on celebrating life with Jesus Christ. Ellen White, one of America's most translated author, has provided us with insights and clues on how to survive in a world where people are power hungry and full of authority. Today's guest, Dr. Rojas, is a special individual. Tell us, Jose, a little bit about yourself.
I'm a pastor, about 30 years worth of ministry. I love the Lord. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, in the United States. And I just believe in serving people until the day of His appearing.
You know, we live in an age where people feel powerless. They feel they have no authority. They feel that they are just being taken advantage of. Tell us what you see as the difference between authority and power.
See, you've named the two key words. See, power is something that's raw, like a tornado. Try to stop a tornado.
That's impossible.
Try to stop a hurricane.
Can't do it.
Go to the beach and try to keep one wave from coming ashore.
I was a lifeguard. I couldn't do it.
Even the tiniest wave with a piece of plywood, you can't stop it from coming in. See, that's power when you have no control over it. Authority, on the other hand, is when you have been granted by the power the ability to do something, and you're accountable. And that is the imbalance that occurs in our world today, when power takes over and there isn't authority to go around.
Well, people are hurt by this so-called power because you have women who are abused.
Yes.
They feel they have no power. They don't want to go someplace else because they feel that no matter where I go, what I do, it's useless. Power hurts people.
That's right.
Power hurts.
That's right. When power is used against people, you always know it because you had no choice in the matter. Violence, crime, all those are expressions of power. Even when police get carried away and do too much, they abuse power. And so that's why power has to be very guarded, because power does corrupt, and absolute power does indeed corrupt absolutely.
Well, we have governments around the world. Some are compassionate and some are not so. Tell us a little bit about your experience with government.
Well, I got to work for a president of a nation, and in my experience, it is very dangerous, because in a presidency, you have a lot of power accumulated there. And it's very, very easy for someone, even with the best intentions, to go in and be impacted by its power. And you can see how over time, power can be seductive. Somebody can actually be sucked into something and start believing the news stories about themselves. So it's a very, very difficult thing to witness. When I worked with the government, I was in charge of humanitarian issues and advised the president on the legislation for those things. And I was able to see up close just how dangerous it can be.
We have a quote that you wanted us to share, and I think it gives additional insight into this whole question of power. A corrupting power stands in prominent places. How often are we painfully startled at the announcement that men of talent, in positions of usefulness and honor have betrayed their trust and appropriated to themselves the public money, or worse still, the treasured pittance of the widow and fatherless. Had these men made the word of God their guide, they would not thus have fallen.
See, now there, Ellen White's given us an example of how when you have so much power and you have access to millions and billions of dollars, how easy it is to start siphoning money. For others, it's sexuality. For others, it's just the overwhelming power of getting it their way. And this is common of any country around the world.
It's really interesting because poor people feel that there's no hope for the future. They feel that their thoughts and ideas have no value. And recently, in the United States, we have seen what has happened when there's not careful accountability of our banks and other institutions.
And greed took over, and look at the calamity it brought. Power corrupted people. and suddenly the nation lost most of its money.
We're going to go to another quotation, and hopefully that'll give us even more insights. Today, as in the days of Babylon, the accuser of the brethren is working through human agencies to hurt and destroy those who are dear to the Lord. Men in power do not realize that they cannot, in justice, control the minds of their fellow men, and Satan works through them to corrupt right dealings. That's powerful, controlling the minds of people.
Yeah, so as a leader can become corrupt in government, then after that, a while, they now want the subjects of their country, their citizens, to start thinking like them. And when you start legislating morality, when you start saying this is what's good and this is what's bad with religion even, then your people have less rights. And that powerlessness that you referred to about the common citizen back home, my government leaders are getting wealthier. They simply do whatever they want. And now they're passing laws to make me do what I don't believe in. And that is where corruption and power reaches their height. And we've seen it over and over in history.
Jesus did not use his power.
Now, see, now that's exciting because Jesus continues to be the example for us in all things. In his ministry, although he was divine and human at the same time, over and over in scriptures and in the reflections of Ellen White, we see confirmed that Jesus had the ability to use his power, but he didn't. He relied on his Father's power as you and I can. So when, for example, after 40 days and 40 nights of not eating or drinking, Jesus was famished. He was at almost the point of death. He could have turned stones into bread, but he didn't. He did not use his power. Instead, angels came and ministered to him and saved his life. Throughout his ministry, we see him not using his power and choosing to rely on God's power. And that's why finally he was confronted by members of the Sanhedrin. By what authority do you do these things? He was casting out demons. He was healing the sick. He was feeding the
Shaking
hungry.
up things.
Yeah, he was calming storms. He was doing it all. What authority do you have? See, now there's the difference. It wasn't with power. It was God's power, but it gave him authority to do things.
Even the disciples said, "What manner of man is this?"
That's right. And remember, Jesus says, all that you have seen me do, you shall be able to do, and in greater measure. The same power that blessed Jesus on earth is the same power that wants to bless us. It gives us authority, and authority means you're accountable. If you mess things up, the authority can be removed.
We have in the New Testament a group of people that had authority, the centurion.
That's right. Now think of it. The Roman centurion was an example of power. Those Roman soldiers were brutal. They'd brutalize the Jewish people. They'd brutalize their own staff, their servants. They commanded at least 100 men. But the story of the centurion is the one that touched Jesus the most, because this man could have been powerful, but by now he believed in authority.
Let's look at this quotation from Ellen White on this incident. The centurion's servant had been stricken with palsy and lay at the point of death. Among the Romans, the servants were slaves, bought and sold in the marketplaces, and treated with abuse and cruelty. But the centurion was tenderly attached to his servant and greatly desired his recovery. He believed that Jesus could heal him. He had not seen the Savior, but the reports he heard had inspired him with faith. The Desire of Ages, page 315.
Now think of this, Ivan. The centurion had not yet met Jesus, yet he fully submitted to Jesus' authority. He said, I'm not worthy, Jesus, for you to come to my house. This means that before he met Jesus, this centurion was already convicted of the Lord, that his role in life was not to exert power and cruelty as other Roman centurions did. He believed in authority, which developed in him the ability to be compassionate and loving even to his servant slave, to the point that when his slave was dying, he didn't feel worthy to have Jesus come over to his house. He just said, Lord, I too am a man in authority, like you. Just command, and my servant will be healed. And that's exactly what happened. Jesus was so emotional about it. He says, I haven't seen this kind of faith in all of Israel.
That's deep. That's deep. We have another quotation we want to look at from Ellen White. The religion of Christ is not a selfish religion. It is not to be kept under lock and key, but it is to be an influence of power going forth from every genuine Christian to enlighten those that sit in darkness. Every soul connected with a true Christian will be made better thereby. We are to be God's light bearers, reflecting the steady beams of heaven upon others. Reflecting Christ, page 205. That's a beautiful quotation by one of America's most translated authors, Ellen White.
That's right. And her reference there is, see, you and I as Christians then receive the power of God through the Holy Ghost. Jesus said, you shall receive power. That means the Lord's power falls upon us. And now we are reflectors of His light. Now we share Christ with others. And it's His power working through us, which means He gives us great authority.
So we have to be ready to receive that so we don't misuse it and abuse it.
That's right. If folks think that they are to be powerful, that will be the problem. But if God is powerful and He lives in me, Christ in me, the hope of glory, now with humility and servitude, I can now proclaim Christ with new authority.
What happens if a preacher, an elder, or a deacon misappropriates that power?
Well, see, that happens in a lot of churches, and I'm sure our viewers would agree. When folks are fighting over who's going to be deaconess or deacon or elder in a church, and they're fighting over the positions, it's over power. See the corrupting influence. But a true servant leader will serve in whatever capacity the church asks them to serve, because it's the power from the Lord who gives me, a servant, the privilege of serving.
Jose, you've given us an excellent box, if I could use that, a parameter to look at the use of authority and power. You are watching Gift of Light with our guest today, Dr. Jose Rojas, Director of Volunteers for the Seventh-day Adventist World Church in North America. Don't leave us, because when we come back, we're going to look at how power can corrupt a congregation, even a family. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Gift of Light with our guest, Dr. Jose Rojas, Director of Volunteer Ministries for the Seventh-day Adventist World Church located in North America. Jose, you mentioned how you have seen the misuse of power in government. Unpackage that and include the church, because the church has governance, it has polity, it has a way of maintaining, quote, law and order. So what are the similarities between the two?
Well, the same power that corrupts a politician once they're involved in it, it could happen the same way at a local church. If you come to think of leadership as you in control, therein lies the problem. In ministry, it should always be God is in control and God is leading us as a people. But the moment you think it's you in control, there is the corrupting influence that we read about.
But so often we hear people say, well, God is leading. I've seen pastors say, God is leading, and I want this church to develop this kind of evangelism ministry. And the members are saying, well, God didn't tell us that. And before you know it, there's a clash.
Well, you've just named it. The pastor's not consulting his church leaders and his board, his members. I saw a cartoon once of a pastor sitting behind a desk, and his feet were up on the desk, and he's got other people sitting around the desk, and he says, we're going to function as a theocracy. And by the way, my name is Theo. There are some pastors that can get carried away. Now, before too many church members go running out now to beat up on their pastors, there are also church elders and deacons and deaconesses that get out of hand as well. I remember once I came to a church to be the new pastor. I was 29 years old, and an elder pulled me aside and he says, you see that brick there, Pastor? He showed me the bricks of the church. He says, you see that brick? And I said, yes. He says, I laid that brick there before you were born. What was he telling me?
You're a little child, therefore you take your orders from me.
From me, that's right. He was an elder, and he'd been an elder for all those years, and I was just this young pastor coming in. So it goes in all directions. Sometimes it could be the pastor, other times it could be a church leader, and folk who think they're entitled to have the power in the church. And the way you know it's power is that they exert constant control over everything. Folks aren't allowed to speak on anything. They don't take input. And then it begins to become negative and destructive.
Well, when you look at how some bishops operate, or in some churches where they have a conference president, there are those who consider themselves a law unto themselves. They feel that on the basis of their seniority, their experience, and let's throw in education, they know what's good for the young intern. I had an intern tell me that he was told that you don't have any thoughts. You don't know anything. I tell you what to do. I tell you when to jump. The only question you ask is how high up on your way up.
And isn't that the saddest thing you ever
It
heard?
is, it is.
And we run into folks like that from time to time. But notice that their careers are not marked by blessings. They may get stuff done, but people do not love them. They don't have the love and respect of the people. They have the fear of the people, and they obey them out of fear. Such leaders who become autocrats actually hurt the ministry. When you have ministry that's exploding, and you have a church that's baptizing 10, 20, 30,000 people a year in an entire section of a country, you go to their ecclesiastical leadership and you find humble, servant-type bishops and presidents, people who think like a servant. Because Jesus once said, whoever wants to be the greatest among you is not the one with the power.
Let him be servant.
It's the one with the authority, the servant. You see, the servant is given authority to accomplish things by the power. And Jesus says, if we think like a servant, we will accomplish more things in leadership.
Well, do you have any illustrations from your experience in government where you saw a particular situation that really could have been avoided had the person maintained a servant mentality? And maybe you might want to shape that servant mentality, because some people may be thinking, oh, I'll be a doormat. Everybody can walk over me if I don't have some muscle in me, if I don't have some starch in me, if I don't stand for something.
Well, see, the servant isn't somebody that's a doormat. The servant is someone who gets things accomplished because they've been given authority to do so. They're just
That's
not
the key. They've been given authority.
Authority, that's right. See, so in government, I've seen presidents who, and I've up close, actually in the room with them, who become corrupted by their power, and then they just start shoving through their idea of what we should be doing, whether it be taking a nation into war, or whether it be a piece of legislation, a law that they want to pass, and they lord it over the Congress or the Parliament and force it through, and suddenly the nation has not been blessed. Suddenly we have suffered because of it. That kind of exertion of power, Jesus always said, by their fruits you will know people. And there are governments that by their fruits we have known them.
Let me ask you a question. You talk about by their fruit we shall know them. In some church structures, they have what is called a business meeting. This is a time when the church members can come and get information on how the church is progressing financially, spiritually, socially, the programs that they're running. And generally, if there's something to be voted, they vote at this meeting. I heard something some time ago where a pastor wanted to get something done in the church, whether it was remodeling or a new wing, and changed the regular time of the business meeting to the middle of the week because he knew that a number of people could not make it to that meeting. And when they voted to do what he wanted them to do, a large segment of the congregation felt that this was not fair, but they didn't have any authority, any power, so they couldn't change it or get it rescinded. That's bad business when the structure that's there to be used by people is misused by the one in control, even though he's been given authority.
See, well, yeah, but he was given authority, but he turned it into power because he began to manipulate things.
Okay.
See, and what I'm sure the story ends like is there wasn't enough money coming in to build the new building.
That's correct.
Because if folks were left out, how are they now going to invest sacrificially their offerings to build the new church building or the new annex that they wanted to add? Had that pastor behaved with authority, which means consulting the people, getting the consensus of the congregation together, even from his opponents, then they could truly build a new church building together.
And that makes it a little sweeter when decisions come common consent. We're all together. In other words, God told you as a leader we should do this, but he's also convinced us as the officers and members that we should unite and go forward. Let's look at it in another setting. How can this be handled with families? Sometimes we have people in families that are very abusive because they feel I'm the head of the family. I'm in control. I run things around here.
Well, we see many examples, even in Christian homes, of outright abuse. You have a spouse who just gets totally out of hand and exerts power in the home. They brutalize the children and they brutalize the spouse. Very often it's the man. But I've even seen it be the wife
You're kidding.
who beats on her husband.
Oh, my.
I had a man call me one day, my woman's going to kill me. She was a very strong woman. He was a skinny little man, and she was going to kill him. And so power can get out of hand even in the home unit. And families, once you know that power is affecting a family negatively, the family stops praying. And our viewers need to pray about this. Think about this too. If your family has stopped praying, you're not having worship before the Lord as a family unit, you're not sitting at a table to eat meals together, then something has happened to your home where power has begun to disable the function of your family. God's plan is, if the father has his role, the mother has her role, the kids have their role, and everybody's held accountable because that's the authority that's been granted by the Lord, then all of a sudden the family unit can make it together.
Well, what would you say to a Christian person who is not working for a Christian organization and the person in that organization is really abusing the workers, making unfair demands with the idea, if you don't do what I'm telling you, you can find another job? How can they survive in that situation? Any clues?
Well, it reminds me of my wife. She worked at 3 different hospitals, and what they all had in common is when she first arrived to work in surgery at those hospitals, there was an overbearing boss who would brutalize everyone. Everyone hated the boss. The boss did not understand authority. He was very controlling and very harsh. My wife would come home crying almost the whole first year that she worked there. She'd take the abuse. She was humble. She was a servant. She'd more than flourish in her role. And by the end of that year, she had won over that boss and taught the boss about the incredible power that comes from including everybody. And I would see the transformation of that boss into a loving servant leader, so that the surgery wing suddenly was transformed because one Christian who believed in servanthood impacted. And these were non-Christian settings in a public hospital. And Christians can make a difference by being servants. Like Jesus said, if you want to be the greatest, be a servant. That's the greatest way to show you have authority, by being a servant leader.
You know, we need to talk about, and perhaps we won't get into it during this edition, but power is being viewed on television, and it's being considered sex, it's being considered position, it's being considered money. How would you say, in a short way, how to handle if you happen to have a beautiful figure, a beautiful face, you're making good money? What helps you to stay firm on the ground with love and compassion for others?
If you make God first in your life, and number 2, you recognize you are only a servant. If you have beautiful physical appearance, if you've been granted the talent of knowing how to make money, whatever it is that you have a position of authority, keep your servanthood humility intact. Some of the greatest leaders I have ever met are people who are absolutely humble.
Share with us a story with a lady who was very humble, and she was honored by 2- and 3-star generals.
This woman is a member of my church, very soft-spoken, loving woman, but she was in command of over 30,000 people who built bridges and dams across the United States of America attached to the United States military, the Army Corps of Engineers. 2- and 3-star generals came with pomp and circumstance to give her plaques, medallions, medals, and awards for her incredible service. She was honored at that level, yet at church she was the most humble, unassuming leader.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jose Rojas, Director of Volunteer Ministries for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, located in Silver Spring, Maryland. Thank you for being with us, for walking the light, for staying in the light, and for this edition of Gift of the Light. Until the next time, keep the faith.
This program was brought to you by the Hope Channel Network, thanks to the generous support of viewers like you. In the United States and Canada, call 1-888-4-HOPE-TV. That's 888-446-7388.